I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This week I'm speaking to Andrew Hesser, the man behind Brian's Quest, a website and YouTube channel dedicated to exploring the natural world from the perspective of Brian, a blind person. Andrew is also blind and draws on his personal experiences of gardening, volunteering for the National Trust and getting out and about in nature to produce videos and a library of resources for gardeners in order to highlight how the natural world can be experienced without sight. Whether you have a visual impairment or not, there's loads to learn from this interview. I start by asking Andrew about the challenges he and others with visual impairments can face in the garden. I wondered what are some of the biggest challenges for partially sighted or blind gardeners?
Yeah, that's the crux of the matter, really, isn't it? Because most of the tasks that I do in the garden are just the tasks that all us gardeners try and work through with various degrees of success. Specifically because I'm totally blind, I can't see anything. And there are no really big challenges, just lots and lots of very small challenges, and there are lots of them. If I could give you a few examples, most of us have got a box of full of seed packets. Some opened that we're sowing, several sowings throughout the season, and others that are brand new packets that just come through the post or left over from last year that we didn't plant. And so one of my challenges is telling which seed packet is which. Another challenge is when I'm planting, say, my runner beans around the bottom of my wigwam, putting one in, and then I turn around, well, where did I put my trowel? And then I can spend the next 10 minutes looking for that. Then I was quite successful the other year with my giant Russian sunflowers. Had about a dozen of them towering into the sky, and they are attracted to slugs and snails, mostly slugs. So it's a challenge to feel my way up and down the very thick stems and many, many leaves and flowers themselves, trying to find these slugs. And sometimes I was getting 15 to 20 off one individual sunflower. So that's another challenge, and that's solved just by having to wear some very thin gloves and touch the whole plant. Other challenges, I suppose, as well, it's about getting information, because a lot of gardening tips and things or displays are accompanied by photographs, so there's a challenge getting to understand exactly what the growing and planting and caring for plants instructions are, if they're accompanied by demonstratory diagrams and photographs. Incidentally, on that issue, for television, many programs have audio description, but there are many nature programs which don't, and one in particular relevant to us here today is Gardener's World. So if any of the Roots and All listeners have any influence at all with Monty Don and the BBC, it would be great if they could put a word in, because audio description is where a voice track is also recorded, and that describes what's going on in the scene in between any dialogue, so it doesn't overlap with the dialogue. So those are just a flavour of some of the challenges I face.
Excellent. Out of interest, how do you deal with your seeds, with organising them?
Several ways. One is tactilely, really, by touching the seeds, even through the packets. I tend to be able to distinguish some seeds from others. And over the years, I've kind of steered away from things like carrots, which are, the seeds are tiny, and you get hundreds and hundreds of them, it seems, in a packet. So the other day, I was just looking through for my third sowing of spinach this year, and these spinach seeds you can feel quite easily even through the packet, and they're kind of like my particular variety, a very small spherical seeds, so they're easy, and then I can distinguish them from the more rougher-edged beetroot seeds. And then I do like growing beans, so my broad beans and my runner beans, they're quite easy to identify, although they can get confused, and sometimes I just have to wait until they germinate and start growing to know, oh yeah, these were the broad beans, and oh yeah, those were the runner beans. So I've got labelling techniques too. Perhaps we'll come on to those a bit later.
Yeah, brilliant. So my next question is, I think, probably a two-part question. So the first one is, how do you navigate your way around your garden? And the second part is kind of broadening that out. How do you find your way around natural outdoor spaces?
Yeah, okay. I think for around my own garden, which I know very well, at the beginning of the season, it's very easy because I don't need to take too much care because there's not really much growing, especially in the vegetable plot, of course. But then as the rose and wigwams and plants start to appear, I've got to be a lot more careful and aware of where I am. So I just use just a garden stick. I think it was a piece when I was pruning some Eleagnus last year. I kept hold of a 1 meter long piece of stick from that, and then I just use that to locate things around the garden. And then I'm often putting like lots of taller bamboos. Most people mark their rows with maybe a 60 centimetre stick pushed into the ground, or maybe even a little bit shorter to mark the ends of rows of plants. But I tend to use 6-foot bean canes around the garden, so it must look like I'm actually growing a bamboo plantation. But it just means that I can find the ends of the rows and the locations of plants just by walking along and just put my hand out and feeling where the bamboo canes are without having to lean down all the time. And then if the other day I planted out a couple of courgette plants, although they weren't in an actual row, they were just in the middle of a patch near the broad beans, actually, a few steps away into the garden from the path. And I'll put a bamboo cane just by one of those so that then I can just reach out and find a bamboo cane and then follow that bamboo cane down and then find the plant. And I know the other plant is sort of adjacent about, 45 centimetres away. And I know which direction that's in. And so that's useful because it stops me hunting for the plants and accidentally stepping on some of the leaves. And as you know, the courgettes do grow out and their leaves can reach, I don't know, it must be like, almost seeming like a metre across. They're actually already trying to approach into where the broad bean plants are. So it's very easy to accidentally step on those. So with that bamboo cane, once I find that bamboo cane, then I go into kind of very cautious, careful mode and then find the plant and then either check whether it's got slugs again or to actually pick the vegetable. So that's an artificial one of navigating my way around. And another one is using natural features. So I've got a pittosporum which grows out across the path. So when I'm walking up the path to try and find the entrance to my polytunnel, then when I brush against the pittosporum, I know, oh yeah, it's just a metre away on my right, and I'll be right in line with the door of my polytunnel. You know, you could find it by tapping with the stick and then finding it that way, but you kind of pick up on the sort of natural clues like that, just brushing my shoulder against the pittosporum, and it's a nice experience anyway. As for out in about in unfamiliar places, then I'll use what's called a long cane, and that's really as long as getting on for a metre and a half, and so up to upper height of my chest, and then that gives me a much longer reach, and then I find things a lot quicker before I end up bumping into them or tripping down them, because outside there are lots of parks and other places there are steps either going up or down, so I need to get plenty of warning there coming up. So with the longer cane, that's how I find those things.
And when you're in your garden, do you find that you avoid planting things that maybe could harm you? I'm thinking of things, if you're feeling your way around the garden, do you have to be careful of plants with things like irritant sap or maybe anything particularly prickly?
Yeah, that's a good thing, because it's got a shortish drive, but on the left I did have a pyrocanthus, and that very, very prickly. So certainly haven't put any more of those in, and a bit low to get rid of that one. But I certainly know how far down the drive I am when I find it with my shoulder. So when I'm going to that part of the border, I always have to remember to wear my gauntlets. And then I suppose brambles, but that's more when I'm gardening, sort of being very careful to cut those back. So the only really prickly things that I avoid. Yeah.
I was reading a book actually the other day about forest bathing, and
Oh, yeah.
it was talking about sort of the multi-sensory experience of being outdoors, and gardens are so much, a kind of feast for all the senses. And I think sometimes maybe those without the sight issues tend to focus on the visual. And I wondered, what do you feel we're missing out on if we are just focusing on the visual?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Well, I suppose texture and shape is one of those things. Like broad beans are a good example, because the stems, when the plant first germinates, it's very round, and then after a few weeks, it starts to go into a really angular square shape. So I noticed that, and I even use that for distinguishing, as I was saying before, about between my broad beans and my runner beans. And it's quite interesting to concentrate on how that stem develops. And I'm not sure if people that aren't sort of looking at people that are looking at things might not really notice that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. Another interview that I did kind of encouraged you to study a plant, but you didn't just look at it. You took a little bite of it, or you smelt it, and it just increased the experience of the plant, or me and the plant. It just kind of added such a dimension to it. It's really an interesting thing to think about. So you kind of spoke about touch, and I wondered how important does scent and sound become, and do you play to those senses in your garden?
Yes, yeah. I think scent is a fantastic source of enjoyment of plants, and although we'd probably grow some of these plants anyway, things like mints, the herbs and oregano and rosemary, parsley, even garlic. If you brush your hand across the green shoots that are coming up, you get some aromas. I've also, the first time last year, had a small peach tree in a pot. And as I'm watering that, you get a slight aroma of the peaches, because they're quite small at the moment, like small marbles, really. But you still get a peach type scent from those. And then one of my favourite fragrances, although it's not necessarily sweet, is the scent of the broad bean plants. I find that kind of like really bracing, and kind of feel like I'm really in amongst the plants when I smell that aroma. Lemon balm is another one. That's fantastic. Brush your hand across that, and it's just wonderful. And I was reading the other day that its genus, I think, is called Melissa, which is from the Greek for honeybee. So I think that's because they're attracted to those plants. And then I also do some volunteering with the National Trust, and one of my jobs was potting up, must have been about 15 to 20 agathosma, which I'd not come across before. And they're sort of almost like pipe cleaner type, tall, about 30 to 40, 50 centimetres tall. They produce little flowers on the ends as well. And they've got a really kind of earthy, indescribable aroma, really. Again, you wouldn't necessarily think it's pretty, but it's sort of stirring and is really nice. And I was reading up about those, and they are from South Africa, and some of those varieties are used for their essential oils, which have medicinal properties. Betulina and crenulata particularly are used, and can help with gastric problems, apparently. And then you were asking about sound as well,
Yes.
weren't you?
Yeah.
And again, that's for the sort of pleasure about being in the garden. I get the wind blowing through the trees. I was noticing the other day that when I was sitting out in the garden, you hear a rustle several hundred meters away, and that's sort of indicating that there's a breeze on its way. And you can almost track the breeze in the trees until it brushes across my face. And I've sort of been tracking that breeze since it hit those trees well away in the distance. And then obviously, bird song, which everybody appreciates. But I even enjoy when I'm indoors and I'm hearing rain rattling on the roof, because I'm thinking, good, all my plants are getting a nice drink.
Yeah, we've all been appreciating that lately, I think.
Yeah. And the other day I was noticing that when I'm filling my watering can from the water butt, and the tap doesn't drain out that fast, even when the water butt's full. So I tend to put the tap on and leave the watering can there, and then go off and do some other little jobs, a bit of weeding or something around those courgettes I was talking about. And then I'm sort of unconsciously, really, but listening, and the note of the water going into the watering can changes. I suppose it would say gets deeper as the water fills up in the can, and it gets to a sort of point where you think, that watering can's nearly full now because of the tone of the sound coming from it. And I know, I better get back to it, so I don't want to waste water, and get back to the watering can. So that's another interesting application of listening in the garden.
Definitely. That's such an evocative sound. I bet everyone listening can just kind of imagine that sound. Because, as you say, it's kind of one of those background noises that almost you don't notice, do you?
No,
you need to kind of make use of it.
That's it. Yeah. Another sounds too, the rattle of seeds in the seed pods, like what are they called? They got the spots on the ladybird poppy.
Oh yeah,
those lovely big seed heads, and you can rattle those. They're great. You mentioning? I have got some grasses as well, and there's some that really almost like weeds. They just pop up anywhere, and they grow really, really well. And they're about 60, 80 centimetres tall. I don't know what they're called. They're quite wide blades, and they make a kind of almost plastic rustly noise as I walk through them. And they can grow to quite big clumps. They don't tend to spread too far, but they form quite a dense clump. But if you break that clump up, and I've done that and planted them up the side of a pathway between a wall and the path, where you get maybe a centimetre or two of an edge of soil, and they've flourished in there, and they've grown back up to, again, 60 centimetres, and they were tiny little plants. They're very resilient. I must send you a photograph of them. Perhaps you can ID it for me.
Yeah, definitely. If I can't, I'm sure someone that's listening can. Yeah.
Yes, nice little indestructible. But as I said, I just love brushing, and then that's again another way of navigating, brushing against that. And I think, I know I'm near the end of the pathway. Especially if you're sort of carrying a tray of plants. Yeah, then I have to put my stick down, or to carry a large tray of plants, or even a large plant. So then I'm just going by, what my legs are brushing past, and I sometimes navigate like that. Touching, you were saying as well. There are certain shrubs too that give great texture, and I was just thinking then of the callistemon, and those lovely sort of barrel-like pieces. I suppose they're the leaves, are they? Or
what, the sort of the spiny bits on it that are soft?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they really are like a bottle brush, and great. And then again, dry things, I suppose, like at the end of the season with the mop head hydrangeas. I really like just brushing my hands across those. You get the sound and the nice texture from those too. There are sort of tactile experiences around every corner in the garden.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned earlier about the labelling method that we can come on to. And I wondered if there were any other kind of methods and processes that help you a lot when you're gardening. Maybe you could mention sort of one or two of the really key ones.
Yeah, I've got some labels which I've been experimenting with the last 12 months, and I can scan those with my smartphone. And you scan them, and then you can enter information yourself into that. So I either speak it or type it in to my smartphone, which I get audio feedback from the phone, you see. And then I can label things. And then so I pop a label into a packet of seeds that I've labelled myself on my smartphone. And then I can just pick up that seed packet any time, and then scan it with my phone's camera, and then it'll repeat the label that I'd set on it when I first labelled it. So I'm finding that really handy.
That's brilliant.
And that helps me tell plants apart, different varieties of hydrangeas I've got labelled as well. So that's one technique. I guess there are loads. I mean, one of the ways of finding out how I do things is I've got a a YouTube channel. My organisation's called Brian's Quest, and it's the quest is to find really good kind of non-visual nature experiences, as well as sharing and learning gardening techniques. And so some of the videos I put up on that YouTube channel are about how a visually impaired person will do jobs like building a wigwam of bamboo canes for the runner beans, and then obviously putting the plants in the appropriate places and tying them up. And I've had some quite good feedback from those videos. They're really aimed more at the people that can see, so that they know how visually impaired people can do things, and then hopefully they will encourage other people, or it gives them a sort of positive image of what visually impaired people can do, and then perhaps that confidence will rub off on other people. I often think too that people at any stage of life, but particularly as they grow older and start losing their vision, might lose a lot of hope, and maybe despair will creep in about not being able to see their garden and enjoy their gardening. So I'm hoping when people can see, they learn from my videos that there's lots of pleasure and lots of jobs you can do without sight. And then that maybe will give them hope if their own sight starts failing in years to come.
I should imagine so. I mean, I watched some of your videos, and
thank you.
And the one where you're planting the tree, it's just for me. I'm full of admiration, because I can only imagine how difficult that must be, and not least because, as you say, you're putting your gear down in between doing different parts of the job. I mean, admittedly, you are stopping for a beer after every single tree that you've planted, but as you say, it is difficult. And if you are too scared to go outside and garden, particularly if you've not tried it before, or your sight is failing you, would you recommend it as an activity to people? Would you say just kind of go for it and try it?
Yes, I definitely would. And going back to that tree planting video example, I forget to put things down where I remember where to go back to them, and I'm often getting frustrated with myself, thinking, well, I should have learnt by now. I've been doing this long enough to remember where I put my spade in, or just because obviously often you just absently-mindedly, don't you, put things down, and then if you can see, you just scan the ground. Oh yeah, that's over there. But if you can't, you need to sort of put things down in a kind of logical place. And even I don't always do that, and sort of smart to myself, thinking, well, I must get better at this, because you can waste so much time, before even frustration creeps in. So yeah, all those. The things that I've learned over the years, it just doesn't always come naturally, and you do need to practice, and you do need to have patience, and you do need to understand that you will get frustrated sometimes, but it can be worked through, and it's about noting and coming up with sometimes your own solutions for doing things, which are just kind of simple techniques. Sometimes I'm picking up my spade or my fork, and they're very similar handles. So I've just got a little bit of string tied on the top of the fork, the long-handled fork in spade, just so that I just reach across. Oh yeah, that's that one. Now also the weights are kind of different of those two garden tools, but any little discreet little indicators need to just help you on your way, because there will be times when it is frustrating. So the more jobs you can do to make things quite smooth and easy to do, that's good. So I wouldn't just recommend that people carry on gardening. I think I would like to see, and that's part of Brian's quest, of getting everybody that has a visual impairment to have a go at growing something, whether it's an indoor plant, an outdoor plant. I've got a cucumber plant, which is in I think it must be a 10 centimeter, 10 centimeter pot. And it's like about 3 foot tall, and it's got a little cucumber on it. And I really must pot that up. But it just taught me that you don't really need very much space to grow a plant. And even if that cucumber doesn't come to much, you can still enjoy the plant itself. And some of these vegetables are very, very vigorous, and they don't always grow grapefruit. But it's just really nice to enjoy the development of the plant and things. And it's such a thrill when you germinate a seed of whatever sort it is. So I would urge vision impaired people that to redress the balance, really, because if you can't see, you can't drive, for example. So that's one area of perhaps enjoyment or sometimes annoyance that you won't experience. So, why not deliberately go out and find something to do? So I'd say definitely everybody should try growing something, and then they will see whether they like that or not. And there are lots of different types of things to grow. Or it could be, if you've got a small little garden, you might decide, well, why not just use that corner to plant a tree, whether it's a fruit tree or just an ordinary tree, and then kind of discipline yourself to go out and look at it every month, say, just to see how it changes throughout a year.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I guess there's probably things that people who design gardens or manage them, and I'm thinking more public gardens and open gardens and things, I suspect there's more that could be done. Is there anything that you'd like to see more or less of in those types of gardens?
Well, that is a big subject. Could you invite me back and we do a whole podcast on this subject? Yeah. Yeah, really, there are some fantastic places out there to visit, and there's lots of enjoyment to get out of visiting a National Trust garden or, going onto the wildlife side, the zoos and things. But sticking to horticulture, there are so many great gardens out there. But a lot of the enjoyment people get is from looking. Kind of looking at the canopy of the woods and seeing how that is, or a view across a valley, or the neat row of hedges in a more formal garden, or the planting scheme of a garden, and appreciating that. I'm just thinking, fairly local to me in Cornwall, we've got Glendurgan Gardens, and they've got a camellia walk along there, and that can be breathtaking in the springtime. So those lots of visual experiences, and I would like to see a lot more done with focusing on a few more tactile and scent experiences. There was a fashion many decades ago for sensory gardens within parkland and formal gardens, but that's gone out of fashion, really, because there's no need to have a garden, a little area specifically for the senses. Those experiences should be spread throughout the complete garden, really. So you go around a corner and you come across a scented plant, rather than just being all grouped into a little sensory garden. The whole of a garden, the whole of a large garden or small garden is a sensory experience, and it's about focusing people towards them, particularly if they have a visual impairment. So, things like audio description. I was talking about, gardener's word, sitting at home watching television and getting audio description, but narration and a sort of descriptive narrative of gardens for people with vision impairments is a great way of sort of sharing the experience, rather than just having maybe a family member or somebody who's guiding you describing things the whole time. It would be nice to have like an independent audio guide to some of these places. And then there's lots to be done about models, particularly to do with wildlife and things. And then finding your way around. If I want to go and explore many of these parklands gardens, or even country like the coastal path around the southwest, there's over 600 miles of it. But I wouldn't go venturing along it myself, because I would get lost. Even though it's a straight pathway, there are lots of little twists and turns and different ways to go, and get disorientated. So there's lots of work to do there with tactile maps and stuff.
Okay. So I suppose to wrap up, I wondered, obviously you've got Brian's Quest, which I would really recommend people watch because I really enjoy the videos on there and I think they're funny and informative. So yeah, I can't recommend that highly enough. But are there any other resources that you can think of that might help, either visually impaired people or people who'd like to know a bit more about how visually impaired people experience gardens? Is there anything else you can think of?
Yeah. Now, there are things called screen readers which enable visually impaired people to access the computer, and that means that you can also access all the websites. And so I use the RHS website quite a bit. There's a lot of information about plants, descriptions of plants, and also planting and caring instructions. So that's a site. The National Trust has some good information about each of its gardens. There's Mr. Plant Geek is somebody else I've just come across. He's got a website, and on there's a good seasonal calendar. So it gives a month-by-month guide to what's about and also what you should be planting and doing within your garden. So those sorts of resources. Now, some of the websites are much better than others on describing what's in photographs, because one of the features of websites, isn't it, is their appearance, and gardens and horticulture is just full of, look at this photograph of this, and why not enjoy this beautiful plant? And but they don't always have text descriptions with them. So again, I'd urge everybody that manages or uses a website tries to ensure that there's a text description with every picture. Otherwise, sometimes visual people don't even know the pictures are there, and it would be good to have a description so that then they can share in the spectacle just as much as everybody else. So those are websites. There was a project carried out a couple of years ago called Sensing Nature, and they looked into how visually impaired people kind of enjoyed the natural world across the board. It wasn't really focused on gardening as such, but it was certainly focused on gardens and how visually impaired people can enjoy the countryside in particular. And they reached a few sort of recommendations of how to design a landscape really to involve and include people with visual impairment. So those are some resources, yeah.
And of course, you can find links to those resources in the show notes. If you're listening and you're involved with Gardener's World, or you're chummy with Monty, perhaps you could have a word about the lack of audio descriptions. If you're out and about, you can download the Candide gardening app. Once you're in the app, go to Places and you'll find audio guides to some of the gardens in your region. And the website of the charity Thrive has some useful information on their Carry On Gardening site, which of course I'll include links to in the show notes as well. So a really big thank you to Andrew for taking part in the interview, and thanks as always to you for listening. I'll leave you with Bug of the Week and Dr. Ian Bedford talking about some bugs that I'm pretty sure you've encountered hopping about over the past couple of weeks.
Walking through a grassy meadow on a warm, sunny summer's day, and we'll almost certainly hear the chirping of grasshoppers. However, living amongst the grass and extremely well camouflaged, we're less likely to see them until they suddenly leap up in front of us to avoid getting squashed. In Britain, we have 11 species of grasshoppers, and these differ in a number of ways from their near relatives, the crickets. Primarily, grasshoppers are herbivores and are active during the day, whilst crickets are omnivores and mainly nocturnal. They also differ in the way that they make their chirps, with grasshoppers rubbing their hind legs against their forewings, and crickets just rubbing their forewings together. Chirping, which is known as stridulation, works in a similar way to us running our fingernails along a comb, and it's used by grasshoppers and crickets to attract a mate. Each species of these fascinating insects has its own unique chirping sound, which ensures they're able to attract a mate from the right species. Amazingly, grasshoppers have tiny but highly evolved ears, not only to recognise the different chirps, but to tell the directions they are coming from. Ears that are not too dissimilar to ours, using eardrums that vibrate at different frequencies. Their ears, however, are not located on their heads, but are on the sides of their abdomen, and are such incredibly effective organs that they are now being studied by scientists to help us develop smaller and more effective hearing aids. Once the grasshoppers have successfully located their partners and mated, the females will begin laying their eggs into the soil. Then, as winter approaches, the adults all die. Their eggs, safely underground, will then overwinter until the following spring, when they hatch into nymphs that feed on lush new grass leaves, growing and molting a few times before they become adults and are ready to begin yet another season of summer chirping.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.